Let me tell you a story about a man named Thomas. Thomas wasn't a criminal. He was a retired high school history teacher from Ohio who loved birdwatching and took meticulous care of his elderly mother. One Tuesday, he drove his perfectly ordinary sedan to the Cincinnati airport for a weekend trip to visit his sister in Tampa. He parked in the garage, walked through the automatic doors, and approached the Delta kiosk to print his boarding pass. He never made it. Before he could even reach the counter, two men in casual clothes approached him. They were polite, professional, and their questions felt like idle curiosity. "How's your trip today, sir? Visiting family?" Within 10 minutes, Thomas was in a small, windowless room, his luggage opened on a table, his heart pounding as one of the men, now identified as a detective, asked him pointed questions about a person he'd never heard of and financial transactions he couldn't comprehend. The ordeal lasted 3 hours. He missed his flight. He was never charged with a crime. He was, to use the dry legal term, investigated and released. The trigger? A system he didn't know existed, scanning a license plate he forgot was even on his car, which flagged him for a tangential link to an investigation he knew nothing about. Thomas's story isn't rare. It's the new normal, and the airport is just the most visible tip of an iceberg that is changing what privacy means in America. Here's my question for you, and I really want you to think about it because your experience matters. Have you ever felt a strange, unexplained sense of being watched in a public place like an airport, a lingering look from a security officer, an unusually long delay at a checkpoint for random screening, or a conversation with a stranger that felt a little too pointed? I want you to share that story in the comments below. Tell me what happened, because what you might have written off as coincidence or bad luck could be a piece of a much larger puzzle we're going to solve together. Stick with me, because by the time we're done, you're going to understand the new rules of the game, the silent, invisible ways observation has evolved, and more importantly, what you can legally and practically do about it. This isn't about paranoia, it's about pattern recognition. For decades, we operated on a simple, if naive, understanding of surveillance. It was the cop following a car, the camera on the street corner, the pat-down at the airport. It was observable, tangible, and often required a threshold of suspicion. That framework is obsolete. What has emerged is a paradigm of ambient, passive, and pervasive monitoring that doesn't target you because you're suspect. It captures you because you exist in the modern world, and then uses algorithms and vast data pools to find the suspicion retroactively. The goal is no longer just to catch the guilty, but to map the innocent, to create a real-time behavioral tapestry against which any deviation, no matter how benign, can be flagged as an anomaly. And the airport, my friends, is the perfect petri dish for this experiment. It's a controlled environment where you, as a traveler, have voluntarily surrendered a degree of your rights for the privilege of movement. You are stressed, on a timeline, carrying your life in a bag, and operating under a complex web of regulations you don't fully understand. You are, in short, the ideal subject. Let's start with the most humdrum, everyday item you possess: your phone. You know they can't force you to unlock it without a warrant at a border crossing, right? That's basic Fourth Amendment territory. But let's talk about what happens long before you ever get to that point. Have you ever used the airport's free Wi-Fi? Of course you have. Everyone does. You click Accept Terms and Connect. Here's what you likely accepted: permission for the network to collect your device's MAC address, a unique identifier for your phone's or laptop's wireless card, and to track its movement throughout the entire terminal. They call this analytics, or improving passenger flow. Little sensors mounted on walls track the ping of your phone as you move from the food court to the gate. This creates a heat map. Individually, it's just a blob of data. But when paired with other data points, your facial image captured by a high-resolution camera as you entered, which was run through a recognition system comparing it to a database of known or suspected individuals. The license plate of the car you just exited, which was instantly read and run against federal, state, and local databases. The credit card you used to pay for parking, linking your identity to your location. You are no longer anonymous. You are a digital dossier moving through space. A police officer doesn't need to physically follow you. A real-time dashboard can show your path, highlight if you lingered near a secure door, and flag if your movement pattern is atypical. Anomaly detection algorithms are trained on millions of passenger journeys. What's atypical? It could be as simple as walking from security directly to a bathroom instead of to your gate. It could be sitting in a chair facing the terminal rather than facing a window. The system doesn't know why you did that. It just knows the model says it's unusual, and it can prompt a human agent to take a closer look. That's when the casual conversation starts. That's what happened to Thomas. His license plate was the seed. It connected to an old investigation involving a former neighbor. The system tagged him as of interest. The Wi-Fi tracking confirmed his location. A human was alerted, and the approach was made. He was never stopped in the traditional sense. He was engaged. And speaking of license plates, let's talk about the parking garage. Most people think of it as a dumb concrete structure. It is, in fact, a data harvesting gold mine. As you pull in, cameras mounted on entry lanes capture your plate. This data is often fed not just to the airport's parking system to calculate your fee, but in real time to a regional law enforcement data hub called an ALPR, or Automated License Plate Reader System. These hubs pool data from police cruisers, toll roads, traffic cameras, and private entities like parking garages. They don't just check for stolen cars. They run your plate against hot lists that can include vehicles associated with persons with outstanding warrants, persons subject to protection orders, individuals on terrorist watch lists, or even people suspected of crimes in other states. But the more insidious function is the creation of a permanent travel log. The system stores every plate read, its location, and its timestamp. This creates a historical record of your movements. A prosecutor can later subpoena this data to place you at the airport on a specific day and time, potentially contradicting an alibi, or an analyst can use it to establish pattern of life. Does this person make unusual, frequent trips to the airport without ever flying? That could flag you for a narcotics investigation. You are building your own movement timeline every time you drive anywhere these cameras exist. Now you walk into the terminal. The first layer you see is the TSA checkpoint. That's the theater, the performative security. It's important, but it's not the intelligence front line. Before you even get there, you are under observation by behavior detection officers. The TSA's program is called Screening of Passengers by Observation Techniques, SPOT. It's controversial and its effectiveness is debated, but it exists. Officers are trained to look for micro-expressions, involuntary facial movements that might indicate stress, deception, or fear. But here's the key. They're not looking for terrorists. They're looking for anomalies. A family running late for a flight, stressed and bickering, might display the same micro-expressions as someone with malicious intent. The system is inherently noisy, but it provides a pretext for referral. You might be pulled aside for secondary screening. That's when the real fishing expedition can begin. In secondary, away from the main line, an officer can engage you in conversation. This is a critical moment. Most people, wanting to be compliant and get to their gate, will answer seemingly innocuous questions. Where are you headed? What's the purpose of your trip? Who are you visiting? These questions serve a dual purpose. The first is behavioral. They are assessing your verbal and physical responses. The second is intelligence gathering. They are building a profile. Your answers are noted. They can be entered into a system. If anything you say conflicts with other data points, say the address you give doesn't match the one associated with your frequent flyer account, it creates a flag. Let's pause here and talk about your rights, because this is where most people crumble. At an airport security checkpoint, you have not waived your Fourth Amendment rights entirely, but the courts have consistently ruled that the administrative need for aviation security justifies a limited, suspicionless search. However, that search is supposed to be limited to the purpose of finding threats to aviation. A TSA agent cannot detain you to ask about unrelated criminal matters without some other basis. But here's the rub: information sharing. The TSA works alongside law enforcement officers, local police, airport police, and federal agents from the FBI, Homeland Security investigations, and others. A TSA agent who develops a suspicion based on your behavior or items in your bag can simply refer you to a waiting law enforcement officer. That officer operates under a different set of rules. They can ask you questions. And this is the most important sentence you will hear today. You are almost always under no legal obligation to answer questions from a law enforcement officer at an airport if you are not under arrest. You must provide your identity if asked in a Terry stop, a brief investigatory detention. But you do not have to answer substantive questions. Am I free to go? Is the most powerful question in the English language in that situation. If the officer says yes, you should politely but firmly leave. If the officer says no, you are being detained, and you should immediately, calmly, and clearly state, "I am invoking my right to remain silent and I want to speak to a lawyer." Then, you stop talking. Completely. This is not being uncooperative. It is exercising a fundamental constitutional right. The overwhelming pressure of the environment, the fear of missing a flight, the authority figure in uniform, these are powerful psychological tools that make people talk themselves into trouble. I've seen cases where a person, nervous about flying, gave inconsistent answers to casual chat, which morphed into a prolonged drug interrogation over a bottle of prescription pills that were perfectly legal. The detention was legal because the suspicion was created by the officer's own questioning. Now let's move past the checkpoint. You think you're in the clear. You're in the secure side, the sterile area. The surveillance here is even more subtle and more advanced. The cameras are different. They are equipped with facial recognition technology that is moving from pilot programs to standard installation. At some gates, especially for international flights, you may board by looking into a camera rather than handing over your boarding pass. That system is verifying that your face matches the face on the passport or ID you provided. But the data capture doesn't end with verification. The image can be stored, analyzed, and added to training sets for the algorithms. It can be used to track your movement within the sterile area. Combined with the Wi-Fi tracking, authorities can have a near-perfect real-time map of who is where. This has legitimate security uses, of course, but the infrastructure, once built, is agnostic. It can be used to find a lost child, or to track a journalist meeting a source, or to monitor the movements of a political activist. And then there's the data you voluntarily give away. The airline app on your phone. It has access to your location, your contacts, your calendar. You use it to check in. It knows when you arrive at the airport. The airline's own systems have a detailed profile on you. Your travel patterns, your seat preferences, your meal choices, who you travel with. This data is a commodity. While there are privacy policies, these datasets are juicy targets for law enforcement subpoenas and national security letters. A pattern of travel to certain cities, booked last minute, paid for with cash, or a prepaid card you bought at a pharmacy, could get you flagged in a system somewhere. Even your social media activity is not off limits. Customs and Border Protection, for example, has requested travelers hand over their social media handles. While you can refuse, that refusal itself can lead to a more thorough, hours-long secondary inspection. The message is clear. Total transparency is the price of smooth passage. So, what about the how to stop it part of our title? You cannot fully opt out. The infrastructure is too embedded. But you can practice what I call defensive privacy, which is about reducing your digital footprint and knowing how to assert your rights. First, the physical layer. When going to the airport, consider your digital hygiene. Turn off Wi-Fi and Bluetooth on your phone before you arrive. This prevents the passive tracking of your device's signals. If you must use Wi-Fi, use a reputable VPN. It won't hide the MAC address from the local network, but it will encrypt your traffic, preventing snooping on what you're doing. Consider using a privacy screen on your phone and laptop. It seems small, but it prevents shoulder surfing by officers or others who can read your messages or search history over your shoulder, which can form the basis for a suspicion. Second, the data layer. Be mindful of what you carry. Your smartphone is a treasure trove. If you are particularly concerned, consider traveling with a burner phone, a simple, inexpensive phone with minimal apps and data used only for travel. For your main phone, ensure it is encrypted and locked with a strong passcode, not a fingerprint or Face ID. Biometrics can be compelled by a court order. A passcode cannot do to Fifth Amendment protection against self-incrimination. Clean out your wallet. Carry only the ID and credit cards you need for the trip. Those membership cards, library cards, even your gym card can all be used to build a profile. Third, and most importantly, the legal and behavioral layer. Know the script. If approached for a conversation that feels like an interrogation, be polite and calm. Do not raise your voice or make sudden movements. Ask the clarifying question. Officer, am I free to go? If the answer is no, I am invoking my right to remain silent. I want to speak to a lawyer. Then, stop talking. Do not elaborate. Do not try to explain. Do not make small talk. Silence is your shield. If you are detained, do not consent to any search of your devices or luggage. State clearly, I do not consent to any search. This preserves your legal rights for later challenge. Carry the number of a trusted lawyer in your phone or wallet. If you don't have one, you can state you want a public defender. Remember, the goal of these engagements is often to gain consent or gather information through conversation. By not participating, you remove the fuel for the engine. For your car, there are anti-ALPR license plate covers, but their legality varies wildly by state, and they often attract more attention than they deflect. A more practical approach is to be aware that your plate is being logged whenever you enter any monitored facility. There is no magic solution here, only awareness. The final, and perhaps most profound layer is societal. We must ask what kind of world we are building. A world where every movement is logged, every association mapped, every anomaly flagged, creates a society of pervasive self-censorship. It chills free association and movement. The airport is the blueprint, the place where we have been conditioned to accept these intrusions for safety. But the technologies and protocols are bleeding out into ordinary city streets, shopping malls, and public spaces. The argument is always the same. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. But privacy is not about hiding. It's about autonomy. It's about the right to live without being perpetually scrutinized by the state. It's the space necessary for ideas, for personal growth, for dissent, and for simple, unobserved human life to occur. Thomas, our retired teacher, never broke a law. He was a data ghost, a digital echo from someone else's life that briefly haunted his own. He left the airport shaken, driving home in silence. The joy of his trip evaporated. He didn't know what had happened. He only knew the feeling of being caught in an invisible web. You now know how that web is woven. You know the threads, the license plate readers, the Wi-Fi pings, the facial recognition, the behavior detection, the data brokers selling your travel patterns, the legal gray zones where questioning happens. You can't tear the web down alone, but you can learn to move through it with your eyes open. You can reduce your signature. You can know the words that protect you, and you can share that knowledge. The greatest counter to a system designed to watch in silence is a population that refuses to stay in the dark. Watch the watchers, understand their tools, and never ever forget that in the balance between security and liberty, your silence, your knowledge, and your calm assertion of rights are the most powerful defenses you have left. Your ordinary life should not be an open book for the state to peruse without cause. The journey to reclaim that principle starts with a single, conscious step into the terminal. With your Wi-Fi off, your rights clear in your mind, and your voice ready to speak the few simple words that keep you free.